What would you do when your cluster manager has been battle tested for over 20 years? The demands of HPC and AI are evolving faster than ever. That's the story behind Warewulf, an open source project that has been foundational in high performance computing since 2001. It's lightweight, simple, and is trusted by HPC teams around the globe. Now, CIQ, a major contributor to the project, is announcing Warewulf Pro, an enhanced version designed for the next generation of performance, flexibility, and scale. And joining me today to talk about it is Jonathon Anderson, Principal HPC Engineer at CIQ and Chair of the Warewulf Project's Technical Steering Committee. Let's find out what's new and what it means for the future of cluster management. For those who may not know, what exactly is Warewulf and where is it typically used today?
So Warewulf is what we call a stateless cluster provisioning system. It's typically used in high-performance computing environments, so where you have a large number of identical compute nodes, maybe some heterogeneity, but a lot of conformity between compute nodes, and then you want to bring them up to work together on a single process. So the fact that it's stateless means that every time you turn on one of those compute nodes in your environment, it starts from a fresh copy of your operating system image. So you have a Warewulf server, and you build and maintain images that are used across your cluster. And every time you turn on a compute node, you know exactly what state that it's starting from, because it starts from a clean copy of that image that it gets over the network from the Warewulf server. And this ends up simplifying just a whole bunch of aspects of cluster maintenance, from initial deployment to troubleshooting, because you know that you don't have configuration drift in your images, to upgrades, because you're always reprovisioning your nodes from a clean state. An upgrade is just a new image that you provision, and it makes the whole process a lot simpler. So you mentioned the history. Warewulf has been around as a project since, I think, about 2001, when Greg Kurtzer, he's the founder of our company, he built it to run clusters at the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. Department of Energy Lab, I think. And by now, Warewulf has actually been pretty widely deployed. I checked the history on this. One of the most popular ways to kind of build and maintain an HPC cluster is this community project called OpenHPC, and Warewulf has been a part of OpenHPC since its first version in 2015 or 2016, depending on when they actually did their release. And now, in the current version of OpenHPC, we're actually two of the recommended ways to deploy OpenHPC, because they document both the previous version, Warewulf 3, as well as the current Warewulf 4 version that we're actively maintaining and developing. So we've been a part of this ecosystem for a long time, and continuing to innovate and kind of push the state of the art in how HPC provisioning works.
Now, if you look at the history, 2001, 2 decades, depending on how you look at a project, can be a long run or can be a short run. Talk a bit about what has helped Warewulf stay relevant today and who's backing it.
The main thing that's helped Warewulf stay relevant is just that it has been in the trenches, being used by the community from that whole time. Like, we're in our 4th major generation, and each of those generations represents something of a foundational shift in, reconsidering how that provisioning is done, how images are built, and how clusters should be managed. I'm relatively new to the project. At a previous site that I was working at, I come from an HPC administrator background, and we had evaluated previous versions of Warewulf, and those have been used in many widely, as I said, many different sites in its history. But Warewulf 4 has just been like an answer to everything I wanted a system like that to be. And I think that speaks very well to the project's willingness to reconsider the needs of its end users, and how technology has changed in those 20 years, and not just keep doing the same thing over and over again.
And that's also a very good segue, since you talk about how technology has changed. How has the nature of clusters and how we deploy them has changed since Warewulf was first introduced?
So one of the big things is that HPC used to be all about academic and government research labs. So you had a small number of large deployments with kind of highly expert groups that were developing the software at the same time. Like I mentioned, Warewulf was developed in a site just like that. But now that kind of computing, even large high-performance computing, is just a day-to-day aspect of a lot of industry, in many different industries. And then AI workloads look an awful lot like HPC at an infrastructure level. So while a lot of AI workloads started on a cloud platform, more recently, we're seeing a lot of those workloads be repatriated to local data centers. And when they get there, they need a tool like Warewulf that helps do that deployment and manage that infrastructure. And they're rediscovering a lot of tools like Warewulf that were developed for a traditional HPC use case, but are applicable to AI. Another thing is the advent of the container ecosystem. So tools like Docker and Kubernetes, these have largely been focused on running services, like long-running web services that will have a request-response cycle. But they also just make it dramatically simpler to build and maintain software stacks in a way that's repeatable and reliable, every time you build it. And so one of the big changes in Warewulf 4, and Warewulf 4 started in about 2020, is that we build on the ecosystem of tools from the container platforms, Podman or Docker or Builda, these tools, even Aptainer, which is a container runtime that we help maintain. We build on those tools to make it easier to build and maintain and test your node images. So that used to be a very manual and tightly coupled process with your local environment. Now it's something that you can automate in a CI/CD pipeline and share throughout your institution, throughout your infrastructure, even between institutions. It's really easy to develop a node image and configuration that goes along with it, and then share that out for other people in the community to take advantage of. And then one last thing that I want to mention that's changed kind of in that timeline since Warewulf has been around. It used to be that Warewulf was one of many such tools. Big ones in the community space that people will know about is a tool called XCAT that was created by IBM and then maintained largely by Lenovo. And then there was another project called ROX that was very popular out of the San Diego Supercomputing Center. And for one reason or another, these tools have largely disappeared. I mean, they still exist, but they're not actively maintained anymore. And there are commercial offerings as well, but most of those have been acquired and then integrated into kind of a proprietary hardware stack. And the cost model for them has just completely changed, characteristically changed, made them unapproachable to the vast majority of people that might be interested in a tool like Warewulf. So we're really glad that Warewulf is not only one of the most cost-effective ways to build and maintain a cluster today, but it also still remains one of, if not the most flexible way to do that. And we build it for HPC largely first, but it's much more flexible beyond that.
CIQ is now announcing Warewulf Pro. What's new in this release, and how does it build on the open source foundation of Warewulf?
So we have the Warewulf server, the Warewulf community project bundled, built, but on top of that, the first and most obvious thing that Warewulf Pro adds is a web interface. And this is something that every time we've put Warewulf in front of someone kind of at a commercial or business level, the conversation eventually reaches, but does it have a web interface? And so we're very excited to say, yes, now it does. And the Warewulf web interface, it's built on a REST API that we built and contributed to the open source project. So that API that we're using to access the Warewulf server is completely open source, completely community. But the goal of the web interface, not only to just make it more approachable, more understandable, make the Warewulf server more discoverable. So a lot of times we find that people don't know that Warewulf can do a certain thing. They don't know this way that you can manage overlays, and we haven't gotten into what overlays are, but there are little features that make it easier to develop and manage parts of the server, and people just don't know that those features exist. Maybe they were added in a recent version. The web interface makes it easier to see, oh, there is a control there, and there's a little question mark next to it, and I can get some help about that part of the interface and learn about it without having to have known that it existed beforehand. The next thing that we add is we pre-build node images that you can deploy into your cluster and use unmodified. So we're starting out with images for a kind of base OpenHPC cluster, but then an OpenHPC cluster with Slurm, which is one popular batch computing system for HPC, as well as OpenPBS, which is another popular batch computing system for high performance computing. And then we're also including access to node images for CIQ's Fuzzball platform, which is our answer to something like Slurm or PBS for a hybrid cloud distributed computing workflow that lets you run your HPC workflows kind of locally or in the cloud and cross between them. All of those images are available out of the box with Warewulf Pro. And then we also pack in configuration overlays that let you use those images and configure how they behave without having to make any changes to them. You don't have to log into those images and update configuration files or make these overlays yourself, which is what you would normally do in a Warewulf environment. You can just load these overlays from Warewulf Pro, make a few configuration settings in the web interface with, just drop downs and select the value you want and use them. And then our node images pack in Aptainer, which I mentioned earlier. This is, people might know it by its former name, Singularity. This is a very popular container runtime that's built specifically for high performance computing workloads. And we wanted to include that within the Warewulf Pro ecosystem to get people kind of on the right track from day one running containerized HPC workloads without having to go and put that part together either. So the goal here is to make Warewulf Pro a complete cluster solution, initially for high performance computing workloads, but eventually for more, and package that together with the support and professional services that you can get from CIQ. And we offer training as well. We can do that remotely or in person, but with the Warewulf Pro product, you get access to all that training curriculum online as well. So if you just want to read it as documentation, do that training internally with your team, you get access to that with the subscription, or we can come in and deliver that training for you.
With Warewulf evolving through this Pro release, how is the open source core being maintained, and what role is CIQ playing in this ecosystem?
Great. So a number of people at CIQ are involved to various degrees in the community platform and the community management. I myself am currently the chair of the technical steering committee. So we have twice a month meetings with other members of that community. So Warewulf as an open source project is largely a collaboration between CIQ and SUSE Linux and the OpenHPC project. So the leadership is pretty healthy, and we have a diverse set of stakeholders that are all either building their own community project from the OpenHPC side that has a vested interest in its kind of continuance as an open platform, but then also commercial support from both CIQ and SUSE, who each with Warewulf Pro, and then I forget what SUSE's product is. I think it's like a SUSE HPC cluster or something like that. They have a commercial platform similar to Warewulf Pro that has a vested interest in it. So we think there's a good long-term future in the open source part of the project. And beyond that, we manage community events, and we hosted a BOF at the most recent PERC 25 event, and I foresee more of that in the future for sure.
What does this release of Pro version means for the teams that actually manage and run clusters day to day?
The first thing is we probably would, there's not like a migration to Warewulf Pro. If you're using Warewulf today and you would like to get some commercial support, someone standing behind your deployment, we've been doing that already, even before we had developed this additional feature set. So we can come in, we can support your existing environment. We might have some advice for how you might adjust it to make things a little bit more straightforward. Sometimes we see people get off in the weeds with Warewulf, and that's one of the things we want to do is help people understand, oh no, this new functionality is makes things easier. Don't be afraid of it. But you can come in and get commercial support from CIQ for your existing Warewulf deployment from day one. if you want over time, you can also redeploy using the base images that we provide, using the overlays that we provide, certainly benefiting from the training that we provide and the support for Aptainer that's included in Warewulf Pro. But nothing would create a hard cut that would be a barrier to entry for getting started with any part of Warewulf Pro, even if it's just Warewulf itself, and benefiting from all of the other parts as they come along. But then as we add additional cluster platforms to Warewulf Pro, we would hope that maybe you would find value in using Warewulf in an increasingly diverse set of your infrastructure. So maybe if you're only using it for HPC today, you might see that you can use it for other things beyond that in the future with a little bit of help.
Is Warewulf Pro designed just for traditional HPC workloads, or could it support emerging areas like AI, edge, or container-based environments?
So AI, absolutely. Like I mentioned earlier, AI is really just GPU clusters in a lot of senses. And so from an infrastructure platform perspective, AI actually ends up being in some ways easier to deploy with Warewulf than traditional HPC because it tends to be a smaller number of large nodes, and the size of the node doesn't really matter to Warewulf. It's just however many nodes you have, you provision those up. So an AI environment is great on Warewulf. One thing that we've done internally, or not just internally, but for customers, is deploy storage clusters. And we're really excited about that as a potential future use case for Warewulf Pro. The one in particular that we've deployed historically with a customer is a distributed file system called BGFS. That was a great experience. And that might surprise people because if you're a stateless cluster, how do you deploy storage and have your storage be persistent? But it's easy to partition portions of the node and say this part is persistent, that is what the storage will live on, but we'll manage the software, the operating system, all of that will be stateless, and it has all of the same benefits as an HPC environment. Upgrades are trivialized, scale out is easy, and managing the environment is just a lot easier. But we also see people in the community do Kubernetes clusters with Warewulf, which is something that we had not really considered at first, but we just keep encountering people not only wanting it, but even doing it. And so we're expecting that a future version of Warewulf Pro will support that as a first-class citizen alongside the HPC use case and will benefit directly from our collaboration with the community in bringing that on board as a supported offering. But then even beyond that, you may or may not be familiar with the Proxmox virtual machine cluster software. We found end users in the community deploying Proxmox clusters and VM infrastructure clusters on Warewulf, which is just something we never would have imagined. And from that, I just want to emphasize the flexibility of the Warewulf platform, that some of the tools in this space are very opinionated about what you can deploy with it and even what versions of software you can deploy with it. And while Warewulf Pro will provide like a baseline starting point of, hey, here's a validated stack of tools that will work well together, we try to keep the tool itself, especially the open source core of Warewulf, as unopinionated as possible so that it's as flexible as possible so that you can take it as a tool in your toolbox and use it for things that we'd never imagined. And that's a big part of the Warewulf development philosophy.
Now, if you look at the future, where do you see Warewulf is heading as the world of HPC, AI, and infrastructure continue to converge?
So one of the things that we want to work on in the near term is a little bit more of that initial cluster deployment experience. Right now, there's a little bit of defining your cluster that we would love to just be automatic discovery and let you just turn on the cluster and it literally just auto detects everything. Right now, you kind of have to tell it where your cluster is. So that's a thing we'd like to improve about the platform. We've also recently added more functionality for maintaining storage and deploying storage within the cluster itself. And that's something that we're expecting to iterate on over time due to customer demand. Also a little bit of resiliency and HA within the platform. You can do that today, but it's what people are asking for, additional functionality there. We're trying to just always be responsive to what we're hearing both from our customers and from the community, what they want to see in the platform. But From CIQ and from a Warewulf Pro standpoint, the biggest thing will be additional platforms supported. So I mentioned, storage clusters. We have conversations with IBM about the GPFS file system and wanting to support that as both a server and a client within the Warewulf platform. We want to do more with Kubernetes and support that because I mentioned AI workloads from an infrastructure standpoint look very much like HPC, but oftentimes the software is deployed as container services. So supporting Kubernetes will definitely go towards supporting more and more of an AI software ecosystem as well. But beyond that, we'll continue being responsive to the community and our customers and hear where they want to take the project and the platform, and we'll be there to support it as we go.
After listening to this conversation, it is quite clear that whether it's research labs or AI clusters in production, the demands on HPC are only going to grow stronger and stronger, which means that tools like Warewulf Pro are going to play even more critical role in this ecosystem. Jonathon, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. We look forward to continue the conversation as the project evolves. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
I look forward to it. Thank you very much for your time.